SeniorCare Medicaid Advisors.com.
Hi everyone, I'm Angela Hart and welcome to the show. How do we keep our money? How do we save our money? These are the concerns people have regarding their loved ones who may be dealing with Medicaid issues. They're getting older, they might have to go to the nursing home. How do we protect the assets? And if they're getting daycare, is that covered by Medicaid even if they have an income? These are the questions going through many of our minds, and so I've invited Pinny Heller of SeniorCare Medicaid Advisors to be my guest on this show, and I wish to welcome him and ask him to tell you a little bit about his background. Welcome, Pinny.
Thank you, Angela. Those questions that you just asked are kind of been my life for the last 12 years. About 12 years ago, I started here in senior care. I actually been going all over New York State, mostly in the 5 boroughs. Been out here on Staten Island a lot as well, and been able to literally speak to somewhere between, at last check, 1,500 and 2,000 families over the last 12 years.
Wow, all about Medicaid.
Well, that's why they call me. And everybody's interested in kind of the same thing. How do we take care of mom and dad, a loved one? If you happen to be a senior care or a senior advocate, how do I take care of the people that I'm responsible for? And how do I do it in a way where they don't have to spend every last dime down to nothing before they get the proper care that they'll need? And everybody's worried about those things. And that's what I've been able to help a lot of families navigate through this very complex system that we know of here in New York State called Medicaid. And the rules are quite different in other places, even as close as New Jersey or Connecticut. But New York State is the place where I've been doing business the last 12 years, meeting with so many families and been able to help them navigate through this very complex system.
Thank you. This is going to be very informative. So we named this segment Fact or Fiction. What are some of the points that people come to you with that are the biggest fallacies regarding Medicaid, which they are misunderstanding?
Well, it's funny you say that, Angela, because we have, of course, like every business, we have a brochure, and on our brochure it talks about these misconceptions that everybody is busy with, and they come from everybody who means well. It could be your brother or sister, it could be your friend at the office, it could be anybody, and everybody means well. But what they don't realize is that if you don't do this for a living, and you're just going by what you heard from friends, what you've heard over the internet, you could be really hurting somebody very badly. And that's the biggest problem that we run into when we are meeting with families, because the first thing they come in with is so many of these misconceptions. I mean, I'll just throw out some of the ones that I hear all the time. And everybody says, this is like, you know, like Family Feud, top 5 answers on the board.
Interesting.
And the top answer on the board is, I heard you can't get Medicaid unless you've done this 5 years ago.
Right. This is what we all think, yeah, the 5-year look-back period.
Well, there you go. It's one of the biggest misconceptions, and I think it comes from a lot of good places. First of all, it comes from the fact that in a lot of states, there is a 5-year look-back, which applies to all forms of Medicaid. But here in New York State, as opposed to many of the states in the country, New York State has something called the Community Medicaid Program, which is something that so many thousands of New Yorkers have been able to take advantage of, and that's specifically geared towards providing for a patient at home, in the comfort of their own home, their own co-op, their own condo, even if someone is living in what's called an assisted living, where you are basically paying privately for your room and board. That's still considered community under the Community Medicaid umbrella. And in New York, as we speak today, there is no look back for that Medicaid.
Wait a sec. Did you hear this, viewers?
Do care about their assets, and if there are some assets that they have, there needs to be the proper planning and the proper guidance to actually deal with those assets. Once those assets are dealt with, after that, in New York, in the Community Medicaid program, the only thing they care about is what you own at the time of the application. And that's something that raises the eyebrows of, I just did it to you.
Yes.
Just did it to
My
you.
eyebrows were raised.
It raises the eyebrows of just about everybody you speak to. And everybody will say the same thing. I heard that from reliable sources. I went to a Medicaid seminar given by an attorney. I went to the social worker at the hospital told me that when my mother was being discharged. And everybody says that 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And the place that that comes from is the fact that there is a 5-year federal Medicaid look-back period. But in New York, it applies specifically to someone applying for nursing home Medicaid benefits.
This is fantastic. So that means a lot more people can be getting care from aides to come into the home for their loved ones and have Medicaid pay for it.
And most importantly, protecting their assets in a very responsible way.
Wow.
This is the reason why we get called, and this is the reason why we exist. And this is what we've been able to do. Like I said, I've been doing this for the last 12 years, helping many families protect their assets legally and properly, and at the same time, getting the proper care for their loved one covered by New York State's Medicaid program. And, you know, that goes along with, I guess, maybe what you would call together with the second biggest misconception up on the board, which is the first thing people always tell me is, I don't think you can help me because I am sure that I do not qualify. I get that all the time. I'll get that on an initial phone call.
I'm sure I don't qualify, and yet...
People will call up and people will say, I don't think you can help me, but I'm calling because my friend said he went to you, and he said, go to Pinny, give him a call, maybe he can do something for you. But I'm telling you, I don't think you can help me. And I said, okay, so why are you calling? Well, my friend told me to call. I said, well, okay, why don't you try it out? Let me just ask you 2 or 3 basic questions, and then we can go over it. And the answers to those questions really can dictate of whether something is possible to be done or not. There are so many variables that go into it, and it's very hard on a short program like this to explain and to go into all of the details. But even a simple thing like, for example, somebody calls me up and says, my father is at the early onset of dementia, and I know we're going to very quickly need an aid for him. And I need to know if this is something that I can qualify for. Well, one very important question that people don't know is your mother alive?
The spouse.
The spouse. Is your mother alive? Oh, my mother, sure, she's fine. You know, she lives and she's taking care of my father, but it's very difficult for her. I mean, she really can't do it. It's kind of she's gonna end up in a hospital.
Stressing her out.
Well,
Sure.
not just the stress, even the physical.
Yes.
She's helping him get up, she's helping him do his daily chores, and she can't do it. And what happens is in a lot of cases is if it's the man that needs the help, the woman is not able to deal with it, and sometimes they do it and they end up in a hospital over it. And this is a big problem for families. Now the kids get involved, and it's difficult for the kids because usually we're talking about adult children. They're married, out of the house, with their own families and full-time jobs, and they're not able to be there for mom and dad. And this becomes a real family problem.
What would the first steps be when somebody comes to you then with these concerns? What do you usually, you start talking about the finance and ask them about their other resources? What happens?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we do is we go ahead and we tell the family to consult with us so that we get everybody's personal situation is different. One thing is very important. I get this call all the time. People, a woman will call me, I need you to help me get on Medicaid because you helped my friend who's in the next apartment from me, and she said there was no problem, so I need you to do the same thing for me that you did for her. First question I ask is, do you have the exact same income as your friend? Do you have the exact same asset base and the same exact accounts and balances like your friend? Of course not. So it's totally different. And everybody's personal information is so important, and it's important for me to go over that with each individual family. And usually, it ends up being a meeting with the adult children. Because usually, for a number of reasons, usually the parents either don't want to be there or the children feel it's not going to be a helpful meeting. Because for many reasons, the seniors themselves get very agitated, and this is not a comfortable discussion for them. So usually what ends up happening is the adult children will have the meeting with me and discuss what needs to be done to protect their parents' assets and get their mom, their dad, maybe sometimes both, onto the Medicaid program to be taken care of. So they don't, what they call, I've learned this term from clients, it's called, Pinny, you got to help us stop the bleeding.
Uh-huh, yes.
Because in many cases, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, we didn't know about you, and we didn't realize there are any options, so what we started doing is spending our parents' money. And we realized that before long, there'll be nothing left. And we were told that there are options, and there are plenty, and that's why they're there. So we start going over this with them, and just about always, by the time we're finished with the consultation, it's like, it's words that they never thought they'd hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I found something very helpful, viewers, and you may also, and Penny Heller will tell us this as well. My husband and I lived in my in-laws' home for more than 2 years after my father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law was admitted to a nursing home, which, by the way, she's in Carmel here on Staten Island, and I want to shout out that is one of the nicest nursing homes. The people are loving and kind, and we really want to sing their praises. But having said that, it turned out that the house is going to be protected because we are caregivers living in their home with them for more than 2 years. Do I have that right?
You do.
Do you want to share anything
You
else
do.
about that? So isn't this great news? So move in with mom and dad if need be to take care of them, and then you get to even save the house.
Well, that's a little known exemption.
I didn't know it
That
either.
is so important, and so many people don't realize that it's there, and that's why the consultation, Angela, is so important, because we draw this information out at the consultation. I will be able to use what you're giving me to be able to hopefully benefit the family. We're able to get them what's called pending service. Patient is home, or patient is being discharged, let's say, in 10 days. However, the family's worried about who's going to pay the agency throughout the Medicaid process. And they're worried about that pending time frame.
Okay.
And that's what we're able to do.
Oh, that's great.
Waiting for the Medicaid to go through.
Oh, that's great, because there's such a concern for people when their parents need care. You need it now. That's kind of what happened with us, because then mom falls and dad falls, and then they're up and about, and then all of a sudden there's another major fall, and activities of daily living. Who can take care of a parent? They say a parent can take care of 12 kids, but 12 kids can't take care of a parent.
Well,
Have you
that's
heard that
very-
expression?
Well, all the time. And remember, when someone comes home from the hospital, they're going to get care. The question is only, who's going to pay for it? They're going to get care. The question is, who's going to pay for it? So, usually when a person is discharged from the hospital, and I'm not sure if you want to go into this right now,
Yes,
but
please.
stop me, but...
No, this is what the viewers are going through this, and right now someone's being discharged from a hospital, and somebody's pulling their hair out, and they're watching this show, or someone's calling them and saying, turn the TV on, this man is going to explain it to you.
I will guarantee you that as we speak, there are tons of people that are going through this issue, and it is an extremely, people panic over this issue.
And it's an arduous process also.
And they want to make sure they're getting the right care, and they want to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, and they want to make sure that it's not going to bleed them dry as far as the assets. But if someone is discharged to go home, for example, let's say in 10 days, so most of the seniors we deal with, almost everybody is on Medicare. And there's a big difference between, of course, Medicare and Medicaid. So almost every senior is on Medicare. And Medicare provides minimal home care at the house. It's called basically transitional care. And they used to provide what we called 4x5, that's 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Now, they've even cut down on that. So Medicare is really cut down. Now it's probably more like 3x3s. 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, and the important thing is that it only lasts for a few weeks. It's intended to be a transitional care so that the person can reacclimate themselves to their own home. But once that period is over, the agency that's providing the care under Medicare benefits will very gently tell the family, next Monday, that's our last day.
Oh, boy.
The care
I
is
ran
over.
into that. That happened with Mom. We didn't know what we were going to do. Tell us more.
Well, that's what happens to a lot of families, and they start getting really panicked. Sometimes a parent is coming home from a rehab center. You mentioned Carmel.
Yes.
So Carmel is like most facilities where they'll have their short-term floors and their long-term floors.
Yes.
And on the short-term floors, those for people that are there under Medicare, they're being covered, the rehab is covered, and maybe we'll go into a little bit later exactly how long Medicare covers at a rehab
Yes.
center, but they're going home soon. And many times, we will get the referral from the discharge planner stating to the family, hey, your mother's going to need much more care after Medicare ends. And unless you have like really deep pockets, you need to see somebody. Find out what it will take to get your father qualified for Medicaid benefits. And a little push from the social worker or discharge planner will get them over to us, and I will be able to explain to them how quickly we can get that loved one onto the Medicaid program so that they have this big sigh of relief.
Yes,
in terms
yes.
of, okay, the care is not going to stop.
Right.
It's based on an assessment. People ask me, well, how many hours will Medicaid pay for my,
Right.
for my parent? Well, of course, they're not keen on providing a lot of hours, but when a patient needs those hours, New York has been great about providing those hours. Usually, you start off with Medicaid on what's called short-term, they call it CHA services.
Okay.
Stands for Certified Home Health Agency.
Okay.
So it's a little bureaucratic, and I'm not sure how much the viewers want to hear, but it starts off short-term.
What does short-term mean? How long?
Short-term, the CHAs usually are only able to give about 6 or 7 hours a day. And within 30 days, there's a process to turn those people automatically to the MLTCs. And once a patient goes from the short-term to the long-term, the MLTCs, that's where the hours can potentially increase dramatically if the need exists. Remember, Medicaid is New York State's long-term care program.
Okay.
There are very few people that I meet. There are some, but very few people that have had the foresight and also the funds to be able to buy their own long-term care insurance.
That's right.
And when people have their own long-term care insurance, if they have a good one, then they're covered. If you have a good policy that's going to pay you a lot of money per day.
What's that,
and-
300 a day maybe is a lot?
Well, for home care.
Yeah.
For
Oh,
home
for home
care it
care,
is.
sure.
For home care, it will suffice or getting close to being enough. However, for nursing home, $300 a day is only covering about a little more than half of what the nursing homes charge today.
Wow.
An average
Wow.
nursing home can run you about $500 a day. So the long-term care policies are great, really great. As a matter of fact, if I may,
Please.
just had a woman, what was it, sometime last week, and she came in and she wanted to discuss the Medicaid process. So I went down my list of questions. And of course, one of my questions is, do you have a long-term care policy? And she says, well, I was lucky to have it. And it was her husband who needed the care. And she said, my husband took this out years ago, and it was one of the smartest things he ever did.
Okay,
He
good.
actually had a super duper policy. It covered something around $400 a day
Sounds good.
for 6 years.
That sounds
And she said she just started using the policy because it just got to a point where she actually cannot leave the home unless she has someone staying with
Sure.
him. So she had to actually trigger the policy and put the policy into effect. And they're starting to pay, and she's getting 24/7 coverage she's getting from the private agency.
Thank
being
God
covered
he's
by a
had the
long-term-
foresight to get that plan. But most people don't have these long-term care
Right,
plans. So
right.
it takes us back to the Medicaid. So tell us more. I want to pick your brain. What else can you share with us?
Pick away. Pick away. I just, if you don't mind, I just wanted to add one point. And
Please.
I asked this woman, I said, well, if you have such a great policy, why are you here?
Oh, yeah.
And she said to me, she said, the doctors say this could be a very, very lengthy process. And she's actually worried about two things. Number one, what would happen after the 6 years are over? And number two, she was concerned even if she does have the full-time help through the policy, what happens if he has to be placed in a nursing home facility? Like I said, it's covering about $400 a day.
Mm-hmm.
She was worried about what happens if she has to put him in a facility, and there are some that are up to $600 and $700 a day. And she says, what happens then? What do I need to do now with my assets and my husband's assets? And that's why I was so happy that she came in, and we were able to discuss all that, and hopefully put him on a plan towards qualifying one day if he needs it. The wording that we kind of use is things like, will the individual outlive the policy? That's the kind of wording that in this industry and in this line of work that I do, these are unfortunately the kind of terms you have to be using, but this is reality.
Yes.
This is reality for so many people out there. You know, if anybody, a young person is listening to this program, they may be thinking, what's all the fuss about? But if you're a middle-aged person and you're dealing with parents who are in their 70s and maybe 80s or higher, you are paying very close attention to these things because you know this is hitting home.
It's coming. And if it's not yet, it's about to.
I kind of feel that this is, I always tell the families, so many of them tell me, oh, I can't believe I'm dealing with this, the sandwich generation, you hear this all the time. I've got my kids to deal with, and now I've got my mother to deal with, and it's so difficult, and I'm juggling my job with all that,
Yes.
and how do I deal with all that?
Yes.
And I tell people, I say, you know what? You wouldn't have to deal with this if your mother died suddenly from a heart attack 25 years ago. This is the downside of aging parents. And most of us want our parents to age.
Right.
We want to
That's right.
have quality years with them.
Yes, and they have
However,
them.
however, the downside is that you got to deal with this.
When they get past that episode.
Yeah, yeah. Because this whole concept of protecting assets is a very, very difficult concept. I was just asked this question by a very smart man just very recently. And he said to me, he said, how come people don't want to talk about this? And I said to him, this is a very, very uncomfortable conversation, especially for the parents. Very uncomfortable. Nobody wants to give up the most important word in my industry, or one of them, control. People do not want to give up control of their income or their assets. And the reason why is because giving up control means dealing with your own income and paying your own bills and dealing with your own and being in control of your money is security.
Yes.
It's security for people. People feel like, I am independent. That's one of the key words you hear from everybody. My mother wants to be independent, and especially my father. My father was the one who was the breadwinner, and he was out there working, and
He paid the bills, and
he
he
did
decided
everything.
all the money
It's
decisions.
really insulting for him to have to realize that he may have to give some of this up,
Oh, yes.
and he's not ready to do that yet.
That's right.
And so therefore, these conversations become extremely uncomfortable for the parents and the children. And remember, we all come from homes where we've been raised properly, and one of the key tenets of family is respect for parents.
Yes.
It's just a key. And this kind of infringes on that. And I've actually taken part in many seminars where the topic of the seminar is taking care of your parents in a respectful way.
Wow.
And that's so important because everybody says, the last thing I want to do is make my mother or father upset with me, thinking that this term we hear all the time, Angela, they'll say, I broached the subject with my father, and his first words were, you want to put me in the grave already? Is that what you want to do?
The guilt.
And therefore, this
Yeah.
conversation is very difficult.
And they shut it down right there.
That's the problem. And you know what happens is that most of the time, when we actually can get down to the bottom line and start dealing with it, is unfortunately only when there's been a real serious medical episode. When there's been a serious medical episode, and all of a sudden the mother and the father are looking seriously at having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars from their hard-earned life savings, then all of a sudden they'll call their daughter or their son and say, okay, fine, let's go to that guy you recommended. Let's go talk to him. Let's see what he's got to offer. And that's when, when I come into the picture many times. And it's unfortunate because so many years have passed where they could have been doing proper planning.
Oh, what a shame.
Yep.
And also, do you notice that that maybe the senior notices that their checks are bouncing and they're getting out of control and they're realizing that things are out of control and they need a little help? Does that ever happen? Or they're past
Does
at
it,
that point?
Does it ever happen?
No, I mean, will they actually, and then they realize, I better call my son or daughter and say, I can't figure this checkbook out. Something's, not
Well,
right. I'm getting bounced checks.
Well, you know what that comes along with. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
You said it. You know.
Yeah.
It comes along with that, and I've dealt with that personally in my own family, and I've seen the pain. Really, it's an extremely painful process to deal with, but it's also extremely painful to realize that your mother is not able to balance a checkbook anymore, and checks are bouncing, or bills are not getting paid, and Con Ed is calling, and these are like really, really painful things to go through. Do you mind if we throw some numbers out there on the
Let's
table?
do it. We need some numbers.
Let's do it. Let's throw some numbers. Okay, so you have Mr. Smith, worked his whole life, saved up. What does the average person have? We're not talking multimillionaires. We're talking middle-class people. That's who we're addressing this to. Middle-class people, middle-class families. You have your mother and your father who worked their whole lives to save up a few dollars. A few dollars could be maybe $75,000 in their savings account. Maybe they've got another $50,000 put away in a CD for their grandchildren. Plus, of course, the all-important house.
Yes. Yes, the house.
They worked hard their whole life to pay off that mortgage. They paid it off. That house is theirs, free and clear. Maybe the house is worth, I don't know, $400,000-$500,000.
Staten Island, typical, yeah.
There you go. And this is their life. This is their entire life savings. And all of a sudden, that could be taken away. Because if you did no planning, this is what happens. Get it done. And this is something that everybody should be doing. Trying your best to explain to your parents that we should be looking at preparing financially for something that's so important. You know, I just wanted to go back to something that Angela said before. She mentioned, misconceptions about
Yes.
Medicaid. And I just wanted to get back to that.
Good, please. Thank you.
We spoke about some of the misconceptions. Here's another one I'll throw out there, and tell me if this is something that you've gone through. People say, I'm afraid of Medicaid because they're going to take my house. I heard they take your house. And you know what? It's one of the biggest misconceptions, but there is an area where it comes from.
Tell us.
The reason that rumor is out there is because Medicaid has been able to, quote unquote, take the house many times. And what they mean by that is Medicaid is able to do what's called estate collection. That means they collect from an estate after the death of a Medicaid recipient.
Okay.
Which means if there was someone that was on Medicaid for years, receiving care through the Medicaid program,
Yes.
if there's any estate created after the person's death, Medicaid has first rights, first dibs on the estate.
1 second. When you say if there's any estate created, what does estate created mean?
Okay, so we're getting into legal terms, and again,
Yeah,
just
but-
for the record,
yeah.
I'm not an attorney,
I know, but generally,
I know
listen.
enough about the issues to be able to tell you that if there are any assets that are left in the Medicaid recipient's name at the time of death,
Right.
this will automatically fall into what's called their estate. That means before any will is probated, the asset goes into the person's estate.
Okay.
And anything that falls into that estate, I call it the estate box. Anything that falls into that estate box, Medicaid has first dibs on.
So
And
then it's
that's what-
true they said they're going to take my house. Then they're right.
And the goal of anybody who's out there helping people through this process initially to plan for this, the goal of any responsible person is to make sure that there will be no estate created after the person's death. And that's where the whole issue of transferring assets properly and doing the proper planning, and you've heard buzzwords like trusts and things of
Yes,
that nature.
yes.
These are all geared towards making sure that there is no estate created. These rumors about they're going to take my house, these rumors start because there were people who didn't do things properly, who didn't plan properly. And that's the reason why this happened. An estate was created.
Meaning they
and
left assets
They
behind.
left assets behind. And I'll give you a perfect example. Take a primary residence.
Okay.
Very, very typical example. So again, we have Mr. Smith. He's got his house. Medicaid, actually, he can qualify for home care, Medicaid, and keep the house in his name. It's
How
his
is
primary
this?
residence. The Medicaid rule is that if it's under...
Let's say it's a widower.
Right, right.
Go ahead.
So he has a house. It's in his name. He does, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to transfer the ownership of the property. He doesn't want to transfer it to his children. He doesn't want to put it in a trust. He doesn't want to do any of the options that he has available to him.
Okay.
He decides he wants that house in his name. Medicaid will take care of him. They'll provide the home attendant. They could be doing this for years. He could be racking up a Medicaid bill of hundreds of thousands of dollars on Medicaid. When Mr. Smith passes away,
Oh.
here's the kicker. Even if Mr. Smith had a will drawn up by an attorney,
Right.
and the will states that upon death, it goes to his 3 children.
Right.
The first thing it does, first the
Goes
house
to Medicaid.
First it goes to the estate. And before the estate is able to be dealt with by looking at the will, Medicaid comes in first and says, wait a minute.
So they put a lien on it.
Well, it's not actually a lien. These are really ultra technical terms, but it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
They actually have a right to collect from that house.
Wow.
And this
Wow.
is where the idea gets out there. They will take my house. It's all because people have not done the proper planning. That's why it's so important for people watching this. Try your best. I myself, when I meet with a family, some people have said maybe I'm a little too forceful. I've seen the aggravation. In my office or in people's homes that I go out there, when I meet with families who have not done the planning, and I've seen what could happen, I have seen the absolute pain that this causes.
The devastation,
The-
financial ruin.
Total financial ruin, Angela. You cannot imagine. I mean,
I can.
we don't have enough time for me to explain stories that have happened, that I have seen families totally devastated by this. And that's why I take the liberty sometimes when I meet with a family, and they'll give me this excuse, and that is that, you don't know my mother. You don't know my father. You don't know
Yes,
how
yes, yes.
difficult it is to deal with them.
Yes.
And I say, you're to blame.
Because?
Somehow, by hook or by crook, you've got to get this done. I'll give you a quick story. I don't know, this goes back 4 or 5 years. I'm meeting with an elderly woman who tells me that her husband is in a nearby nursing home
Okay.
from my office. And it's a second marriage. She said that she married him about 25 years ago. He was about, 85 years old.
He was 85, not when they got married.
No. At that time. He was 85 then, and remarried.
Yeah.
And she said to me, she said, all our finances, which is very common in second marriages, all our finances were kept separate and
Yes.
everything like that.
Yes.
He was going to be a long-term resident of the nursing home. He was never going home. And this goes into what we started talking about when I mentioned to you about the spouse.
Yes.
And the spousal. We really never got back to that because there's
Right, the
so many.
spousal exemption.
Yeah,
Right.
there's so many things that come into this.
Let's talk about this.
Well, the spousal exemption is there, and it's available, and it is absolutely accepted by Medicaid. There's actually, the spousal refusal form is actually a New York City form.
What does it actually mean? It's a fancy word, spousal refusal, but what are we talking about?
Well, it kind of means that the spouse is entitled to have the assets.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, in New York, the amount that a spouse is entitled to have, I believe it's roughly about $120,000.
No matter what the
No matter
estate's
what,
worth or anything
no
like
matter $120,000 for what's called the community spouse. It's called a community spouse resource allowance.
that. Okay.
The spouse is entitled to $120,000. If the couple had beyond that, so there's 2 options. Medicaid would be very happy if the healthy spouse spent all the money that they had on the nursing home and got the total assets down to 120. And once they spent all their money and they're down to 120,
Yeah.
then apply for Medicaid. New York State would be really happy if
Why?
you did that, because you spent all that money and you've paid privately for all you could.
Oh,
If you paid,
okay. And
yeah.
so they say now you can keep your 120.
Now keep your 120.
Interesting.
However, the spousal refusal exists in New York. It's all over New York State, and the spouse is actually entitled to hold more than that if they sign the spousal refusal. The spousal refusal kind of means it's intended for getting Medicaid for the spouse. New York State has the absolute right, and it's on the actual form, to come back to the spouse. In legal terms, they would call it suing the spouse.
Okay.
It sounds scary,
Right.
but in real terms, it means you can get Medicaid for your spouse, and you can always negotiate with New York State at a later date. They will come back to you asking for the money, but you can always negotiate with them. And there's many benefits to the spousal refusal. One of the things that I was recommending to this woman who came in, is the spousal refusal. And I explained to her that it would entail her husband transferring his assets over to her. Now, think about it. This is a second marriage. So it's not always the case that they're so comfortable doing this.
Right.
In this particular case, it was a little easier because neither of them had children. And he
Much
actually,
easier then, yes.
Yeah, he actually had written into his will that she would inherit everything that he owns.
Oh, so this
it was a
much
little,
easier.
yeah, much easier.
But still, there were concerns.
But when I mentioned even the topic of him giving up control of his assets, she had this look on her face and she said, "You don't know my husband. He doesn't trust anyone, even me, with his money."
I'm glad I don't have a husband like that.
Well, I can only tell you that she said to me, I'll never forget these words. She said to me, he only trusts one person in this world, and that's his broker.
Oh my gosh!
Yep.
Are you more than his own wife?
She said his broker has been with him
Ay.
for many years. He's made good money for him, and he trusts his broker.
Oh, how nice.
So I came up with this idea, and I knew that the husband was staying in a place that wasn't too far from me. So I just threw this out there, and I said to her, I said, you know what? When you go visit your husband later today, just mention to him that if he would allow it, I would be willing to drive down to the facility and meet with him privately and explain to him the benefits of doing this.
That was a good idea.
She started laughing in my face. She
thought
said, he'll never meet with you. Don't even think about it. It's never going to happen. No way, no how. Forget it. I said, okay, I'm just throwing it out there. I remember it being a morning appointment. It was sometime around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The phone rings. They tell me that I have a call on line 4. I pick it up, and sure enough, it's the wife.
Oh,
No,
it's
it's
the
the wife. She said, Pinny, you're not going to believe it. He said he wants to see you. And sure enough, the next morning I went down there, and of course, we were on conference call with guess who?
The husband.
No, I was there at the bedside.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were the
We were on
his broker.
His
of
broker.
course.
On conference with the broker. And the three of us spoke, and I mentioned the benefits of doing these particular techniques,
Procedures, yes.
procedures, and the broker said to him, Jim, go for it. It sounds good.
You
And
got
sure
the
enough,
blessing. I
that's-
can't
we
believe
got the
it.
broker's blessing.
The broker's blessing.
And that's what we did.
But seriously, so thank God you were persistent with the client so that you could get the right protection for her.
Yeah, and this goes back to one of the things that I was saying at the very outset of this program, and that is that everybody's case is different. There's no one size fits all. If you are going through something today and you are talking to your sister-in-law, you're talking to your best friend, you're talking to a coworker and explaining to them what they're going through, and they give you either good news or bad news, don't buy it. Everything is different.
It doesn't mean it's applicable to you.
Of course not.
Okay.
Each individual case is different.
Very important. Very
And
important.
People just don't realize that. They think it's one size fits all with Medicaid. There are so many nuances to the Medicaid regulations. And you really need to sit down with somebody who's very comfortable and knows the
Who does this
regulations.
all day long.
Who does this all day long.
I think it's someone who does it all the time, and
You
this is
know,
all they do all day
Thank you.
long.
It's as you're talking, Angela, I'm triggering me another story.
We have time.
I once sat with a woman, and she was telling me that she has a banker who she trusts, who sold her a lot of annuity products. And I was explaining to her what can be done to get her, I think it was husband at that time, on the Medicaid. And she was telling me, my banker told me, absolutely not, don't do it. I said, why? And she said, I don't know. He said he's had very bad experiences and I should stay away from it.
Wow.
So I told her, I said, give me his name, give me his number, let's call him right now. So pick up the phone, call him, I get the broker on the phone, the banker, get him on the phone, I tell him that I'm sitting with his client, and I
good
go over
idea.
I go over the details of it, and I explain to him why it is that I'm recommending what I'm recommending. And he says, you know, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds correct. As a matter of fact, he even took my name and number because he says he has other people, other clients of his that may need my services.
I can't believe this.
So-
Thank goodness that you thought to do that
So
for the client's sake.
So I said to him, I said, oh, so you mean to tell me that you have other people who talk to you about applying for Medicaid? And he says, oh, this happens all the time. I deal with the senior population. So I said to him, I said, let's make a deal. I said, from now on, when someone comes into my office and they're looking to purchase an annuity, I'm going to send it to you. But if someone comes in asking about Medicaid, don't advise them.
Right.
Send them to me. He said, deal.
Wonderful.
Deal.
And how long ago was that?
6 years ago. And we've had quite a number of referrals from him, and I've tried my best to send some people back who ask, because, people come into my office, for the most part about the Medicaid, but a lot of times they're asking me about financial advice and investments.
And that's not your area.
Not
Right.
my area. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to work with a lot of banking professionals who I trust, and I'm more than happy to pass their names along if people are interested in that kind of thing, financial planning or financial investing.
Right.
And I don't do that.
Okay, I have two questions or
Yes.
2 points. Pooled income. What
Yes.
is that all about? That's a hot topic these days.
You
What does
just
it mean?
opened up an entire world.
Really?
Let me try to break it down for the short period of time we have left.
Yes.
And that is income. We spoke about the two numbers that Medicaid cares about, income and assets.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing about assets, that if you speak to someone like myself, you speak to attorneys, they will tell you exactly how and when and with where to transfer your assets. Assets are transferable. Income, of course, is not. Now, what's the income sources for most of the people I deal with?
Social Security.
Social Security, pension.
Right.
Okay, here's another big one that people don't realize. IRAs. Now, most of the seniors that I deal with obviously are over the age of 70. And here's a little bit of financial news, and that is that when you have an IRA, when you hit the age of 70 and a half, the U.S. government mandates, the IRS mandates, that you start taking what's called minimum distributions. The distribution number is based on an algorithm that they use, based on your life expectancy and the value of the IRA, the balance in the IRA, and they come up with you what's called your RMD, standing for Required Minimum Distribution. So, for example, somebody has an IRA, it's got $100,000 in it, and they saved up their whole life. When you hit 70 and a half, they're going to come up with an algorithm that's going to tell you it's going to be approximately about 5%. You can use that 5% figure. So approximately every year, the bank is going to cut you a check for $5,000. That means that $5,000 is going to go into your checking account, and you're going to be taxed on that money. And that's how they start taxing you on your IRAs. The relevance to Medicaid is the fact that now that $5,000 is now income. Medicaid considers that as part of your income, as does your accountant. So now you've got your income source, your Social Security. Mrs. Jones may be getting $1,300 Social Security. She may be getting a pension of $500. And now she's receiving $5,000 annually. They'll divide that by 12 and come up with the monthly amount that they'll add to your Social Security and your pension. So let's, for argument's sake, say someone, you have their total income comes out to $1,845.
Okay.
And I use the number $1,845 for a reason, because Medicaid income allowance, the threshold, is as we speak today in 2016, the number is $845. That's the income threshold. Now, if you just fell back on your chair, I can understand why. Because the first thing that everyone tells me when I throw that number is the same line. How do they expect me to live on? How do they expect my mother to live on $800? Who can live on that kind of money?
Right.
Well, I'm not here to discuss how Medicaid came up with that number. To be honest, Angela, don't even know. It has something to do with the federal poverty level.
Not in New York.
Well, this is the number that's used.
Okay.
I always tell people, look, we are not going to be able to argue with it.
Right.
Can't fight City
Right.
Hall.
Using that,
Got to
then.
deal with it.
Okay.
So remember, Mrs. Jones is making $1,845. That means she's making $1,000 over the threshold every single month. Now, if she applies and will qualify for Medicaid based on her assets, and I never even gave you the number.
Tell me.
We've been talking about so many
Tell
different
me,
things.
yes.
Okay, so the asset number in New
formula.
York today in 2016, 14,850. That's the threshold on assets. That means when you add up your checking account, your savings account, maybe your CD, it cannot exceed $14,850. If it does, you're not qualified. What that number does not include, IRAs. Remember, we just mentioned about
Yes.
Mrs. Jones. She has an IRA for $100,000.
Right.
That's not counted. The distribution amount is counted as your income, but the principal balance of the IRA not counted as an asset. The primary residence. As long as it's under, Medicaid has a threshold, I believe it's about $850,000.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I know to a lot of Staten Islanders, the average home is what, about $400,000, $500,000, $600,000?
Yeah.
The average home
Yes.
is under that threshold?
Yes.
So your primary residence is not counted towards that $14,850.
This is great. You're a wealth of information. This is fantastic.
Well, it's just, I live this. I live it. And I'm passionate about it because I have seen the pain of people who are not advised properly and start spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to get back to the pooled income trust in a minute because it's so important. However, I just wanted to add something, and that is that years ago, I'll never forget it. Nassau County, I had a brother and a sister come down to me about the mother, and they were both wealthy. I forget who. One was a doctor, one was a lawyer. There you go, doctor and lawyer. The mother had nothing to her name. Nothing to her name. She lived in a rental apartment. $14,850 was probably triple what she owned. But she did have income. She had a Social Security check. Social Security check was 13 and change, 13.50, let's say, 13.45. That means she's $500 every month over the allowable.
So what happened?
So what happened was, I forget who it was, the lawyer or the doctor, one of them went into what's called the local DSS, that stands for the Department of Social Services out in Nassau County.
Yes.
And they met with a caseworker.
Yes.
And the Medicaid caseworker asked the question, what does your mother earn in income? And they were honest. Why not?
Sure.
They said $13.45. The caseworker says, Medicaid's not an option. She's over the limit. Over the limit. You're giving me the look, that's the proper look. That's the proper
astounding.
look. So, I forget who it was, but one of them, I forget who it was that told me, they said, well, we're professionals, and we assumed that the caseworker knew her stuff.
Right.
So we walked out. We told the mother,
Oh,
not
don't
an
tell
option.
me.
Mother had, dementia.
Yeah.
She needed full-time help.
Yeah.
And between the doctor and the lawyer, they started paying for it.
And what did you find out?
Now, a lot of people watching this may say, well, so what? So let them pay for it. And, if that's the way you feel, fine, you can contribute to your
But instead,
you can easily, they were easily able to qualify the mother for Medicaid
How?
because of this pooled income trust concept.
oh my gosh, did you hear this, viewers? So don't believe everything you hear. Fact or fiction, he's giving us facts here. Don't assume that because a caseworker at a local agency told you something, that it's 100% correct.
What is the pooled income trust? Let me just explain it. It's basically, it has the word trust because it's a product that's an irrevocable trust set up with one of the foundations in New York State. There are various foundations in New York State that have contracts with Medicaid. And what they're able to do for people is open up an account. So we have an account opened up in the name of Mary Jones, and she will put, after her full $13.45 goes into her checking account every month, like it always does, she is then going to transfer $500 to this income trust being held and managed by the foundation. So kind of that income, that $500, once she gives it over, is going to be, it's going to be not accessible to her anymore. She has no access to that money anymore. There's only one way she can get to it, and that is by sending any bills that come, living expense bills that come in her name. For example, this particular woman was renting an apartment. She was paying, I forget, it was just about $500, $600.
Yeah.
She was paying rent.
Right.
So you transfer the $500 to the foundation, you give them the rent bill, you give them the lease agreement, and now they will pay the landlord your rent using the $500 that you gave them. Medicaid is okay with that.
It's perfectly legal. And had they gotten the right consultation or advice from you, they would have
Well, here's the thing. They looked at each other, and then I think the brother turns to me and said, Pinny, do you know how much money my sister and I have paid for Mom over the last year and a half since I walked out of that DSS office?
50 grand?
She said, they told me $110,000.
Ooh,
She needed
ouch.
24-hour care.
Ouch.
It was about, I don't remember, a year and a half, 2 years, I forget the exact time period. But I remember the $110,000. And they said, look, we make good money, we were happy to do it, we're always going to take care of Mom. But to realize that she qualifies for benefits, remember, Mom has paid into the Medicaid system her whole life. Their father paid into the Medicaid system his whole life. And
Very
now
important,
it's
very
time for
important.
them to be able to get a hold of the benefits that they've been putting into the system all these years.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The only thing that stopped them was the actual regulation, and no one actually did anything wrong. The Medicaid caseworker probably was not aware of this concept because the pooled income trust concept is relatively new.
Okay.
It's only out there about the last 10 or 12 years.
Okay.
And not every caseworker and not every hospital social worker and rehab discharge planner, not everyone out there is aware of it. But you do say, which is true, you said it's a hot topic because a lot of people are now finding out about it. And the question is, how does it apply to me? How can I utilize it? I gave you an example of a $500 we call excess income, $500. What about if the excess income was $2,500?
Right.
What do you do then?
Yeah, what do you
Well,
do?
you got to put the $2,500 into the pool trust. But what happens if I don't use up all the money? What happens then? These are the nitty-gritty details that happen when you apply for this pooled income trust, and you need to know how to deal with it to make sure that you can utilize it properly. These are one of the things that we sit down with families, and everyone, of course, is different. Not one person's living expenses is exactly the same as somebody else's. Everyone is different.
They're dealing with all
And-
different criteria.
Yeah, and Angela, you probably can imagine. People will call me before they even come down and say, "Can you just explain this to me 2 minutes on the phone?" And,
2 minutes,
And
sure.
you know what? It just doesn't do it justice. You need to go over this very carefully with them, both the assets that they own, the income that they receive, and to make sure that we can take full advantage of every single option that they have under the Medicaid regulations. We do everything by the book. But you know what? That book, the Medicaid
It's
regulations,
very thick.
is very, very large. And the average person is not going through it.
Okay, thank you, Penny, so much. This has been so helpful. We're going to be doing a series, viewers, about senior care and caring for seniors. We're going to focus on the MLTCs, Medicaid. We're going to have guests from nursing homes come on the show, discharge planners, and in fact, if there are some professionals whom you know that would like to come out and speak to the viewers about this, please contact me. Our phone number and our web address appear throughout the show and at the end of the show. So I'm going to thank Penny very much for coming on the show. I
Thank
hope
you
you
for
will
having
again.
me. Yeah, absolutely.
We're on every Tuesday night on Staten Island at 8 p.m. We're on in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again.